Hello everyone, and welcome to this showcase slash solo of my personal favorite ID, Liu Ishmael. Now you may be wondering why she's my favorite, and the answer is because there's not really much competition. Burn is my favorite status condition, and has been my favorite ever since Library of Ruina. So with her being the only good burn ID in the entire game, obviously she'd be my favorite. Now before we talk about anything, we should first talk about burn as a status condition. Burn is a damage over time effect in the same vein as sinking and rupture, but unlike those two, burn is relatively easy to stack up to a high number and keep it ticking over a long period of time. This of course means that the burn damage itself is effectively weaker than rupture and sinking, but the real benefit is that due to burn's consistency, it is incredibly easy to activate the bonus conditions on any burn ID's skills. Liu Ishmael is no exception to this, as she benefits heavily from attacking an enemy with high burn potency. Speaking of, I suppose it's about time we went over her. Starting with her stats, she is pretty average all around, with a base defense level, moderate amount of HP, and an average speed. Damage resistances I find to not really change a whole lot when it comes to soloing, other than changing what attacks you want to get hit by. For Ishmael, blunt is fine, but pierce is not. This tends to work out in her favor, as most enemies with blunt attacks are also weak to blunt, which all of her skills are. Her skill 1, Red Kick, is about as average as you can get. Being a skill 1 that rolls 4 to 10, it won't win many clashes, but it does gain +1 coin power for every burn on its target, so it'll very easily become a 4 to 14, which is pretty much the highest a skill 1 can roll. Her skill 2, Frontal Assault, is her go-to clashing move. It has the highest roll of any of her skills, going from a 4 to 16 and becoming a 4 to 22 if the target has 12 burn. This skill is the one you'll want to be using the most, not only because it rolls so high, but also because it's the way you activate her passive. Her passive, Intense Blaze, is entirely focused on damage, giving you a 10% bonus blunt damage for every 3 burn. It activates on Wrath Res, so her skill 2 and counter are how you activate it. Her skill 3 is focused solely on dealing a ton of damage. Rolling 3 to 15 and having 4 coins, it's obvious that it's meant purely for damage. The two main effects for this attack are if the target has 6 burn count and potency, it deals 50% more damage, and if you stagger or kill an enemy with the 4th coin, you gain a plus coin next turn. That may sound powerful, but anything that relies on you performing a specific action with a specific coin is ultimately unreliable. It's nice if you get it, but I wouldn't count on it. The real beauty of this identity, however, is just how synergistic it is with the ego Ardor Star Blossom. She perfectly fuels it with all of her skills, not only being the right sins, but also the sins being on the skills they are, make it much more reliable. Not to mention just how this ego works, it makes soloing with this ID very good. Moving on to the run itself, let's start with the support passives. They are pretty much exactly the same as every other solo run, Vi Sinclair and LCB Mersol for 20% damage reduction, LCB Gregor for 5 healing every turn, and Chef Ryoshu for even more healing, since I have a lust skill that can fuel it. Pretty much every human fight boils down to the same thing. Use Ardor Star Blossom turn 1 to stagger 3 enemies and take a ton less damage. The next turn I'm able to either kill one of them or clash with the remaining enemies and stagger them instead. Repeat until everything is dead. One of the main benefits of Ardor Blossom Star is that it targets the fastest enemy, meaning it will always move first, and if they are using a dangerous pierce skill, I don't have to just tank it. The first ego gift I get is the Phlebotomy Pack, which is helpful to keep me healthy, especially when I use Ardor Blossom Star, as I will heal a lot from that. The floor 1 boss is nothing to talk about, stupid easy, literally any sinner could solo it, but it has the benefit of giving me one of the best ego gifts I could have gotten, perversion. Every time you kill an enemy, it gives you an extra sin resource of the type used, but if it's a wrath skill, you get every sin type the sinner has, and in the case of Liu Ishmael, we have every type that fuels Ardor Blossom Star, meaning we effectively will never run out of resources for it as long as we kill enemies with a wrath skill. On floor 2, we pick up some more support passives in the form of Liu Honglu for extra burn count, G-Corp Otis for bonus buffs sometimes, and LCB Rodion for 20% extra damage on heads. The first fight gives us the Grimy Iron Stake, not really useful but does give defense level down when using egos. After another fight, we get an event, which is actually useless, giving us Dreaming Electric Sheep. Technically, we could activate its effects with 3 skill 3s, but I don't think it ever happened in this run. The floor 2 boss is the factory. Just as easy as the floor 1 boss, but this time with the benefit of being able to farm sin resources. Since the robots don't die, you can just keep hitting them with all of your skills and get a ton of resources. I went into the fight with 22 Wrath, 10 Lust, and 9 Envy, and left it with 27, 20, and 13 respectively. The gift received is the Pinpoint Logic Circuit, which is really good as it's simply free extra burn with every attack. On floor 3, we get the last of the support passives to round out our build. Regret Faust for extra clash power on enemies with multiple debuffs, LCB Yisong to counter the sanity drain from egos, and LCB Heathcliff for 10% bonus blunt damage. I never take Don Quixote, as every single one of her passives is unusable for Liu Ishmael. The first fight is against Pecatulums, and they give me the gift Golden Urn, meaning I'll be able to afford everything from here on. One thing I've yet to mention is how after this run I have a newfound respect for counter skills. While not being very defensive, there is one specific scenario where they are the best. In human fights, when you can't clash with one of them and they have multiple skill slots and are also weak to your counter, when they attack you with their first skill, they'll proc your counter, which will then stagger them and cancel their second attack. This is the one and only scenario where counters are the best of all of the defense skills. Getting another ego gift, we gain Ashes to Ashes, giving us a tiny bit of extra burn. Not really that impactful, but good nonetheless. Now, the floor 3 boss is against the Blubbering Toad. Going into this fight, I was unsure if I could even beat him, as this is actually my 4th attempt at this run. The first run was destroyed by K-Corp as the 3rd boss. They simply did too much damage, and I could not beat their DPS race. The second run was met with defeat at the final boss against Cromer, where I messed up well before the fight even started and didn't have enough ego resources to corrode in time on turn 3. And the third run was stopped by the Blubbering Toad himself. Now this fight is pretty tricky for multiple reasons. First and foremost being that if I used any ego other than base, I would become weak to gloom, making me take a ton of damage. I couldn't even use base ego as it would take my gloom resource, which would deactivate Sinclair's passive, making it so even if I beat the Toad, I'd probably lose later on without the 10% reduced damage. The second problem was Ardor Blossom Star itself. In this fight, you are guaranteed to corrode, and every time it will be Ardor Blossom, which will deal 10% of your max HP every time it's used. The main strategy is trying to reduce as much damage as possible in the first 2 turns, and letting the Toad corrode you on turn 3. One benefit of corroding, despite the fact that you take a ton of damage, is that it's still incredibly powerful and decimates the frog in turn. So basically, you just need to survive long enough for the frog to beat itself by making you corrode.
적합한 관리법이었어요. 다행이에요. 보이나요? 세상과
And what do we get as a reward for this ordeal? Wound cleared. Virtually worthless. The first Peccultulum fight gives us something good though, in Dust to Dust. And the one right after gives Headless Portrait, which is less useful. The next event may not seem that good at first glance, but Midwinter Nightmare is an essential gift for this run. And after that we get Thorny Path, which could do something with less res. Maybe. On to the fourth boss, which is the Fairy Gentleman. He's actually really easy to solo, as it's very easy to get 5 morale boosts. And I honestly would have been able to beat him on my first try if I knew how he worked. You see, I didn't realize he would stagger himself when he attacked you with 5 tipsy, and I just saw 3 powerful pierce attacks and thought, I'm dead. Imagine my surprise when I fail a clash, and then none of my other clashes actually go off. The second try is just as easy as the first, but this time I actually know what I'm doing and just let him attack me, staggering himself and letting me win. Our reward for this is Eclipse of Scarlet Moths. At the first shop of floor 5, we pick up Lithograph and Melted Spring, and get Standard Duty Battery and Crown of Roses from the events right after. Another Peccultulum fight gives us the Broken Revolver, and the final event gives us Late Bloomer's Tattoo. At the final shop, we buy Special Contract and Skeletal Crumbs, finishing our build and giving us nothing left to do but to fight the floor 5 boss. The final boss is the Brazen Bull, a tricky fight but incredibly fitting for us to fight fire with fire. The main difficulty came down to being slightly weak to his attacks and also being unable to clash with them, essentially boiling down to being a fight reliant on pure RNG, as I could win the clashes if they were in my favor. One of the biggest factors that determined my success here, however, wasn't relying on RNG, as that only really applied to the first 2 turns. It was, in fact, Regret Faust's passive. You see, a lot of the bull's skills were only a single point higher than mine, so if he had rolled heads, I should have lost. But thanks to Faust's passive, in combination with all of the ego gifts that applied different debuffs, the bull got a -1, allowing me to win the clash. And that's how I soloed Mirror Dungeon 2 hard with Liu Ishmael. Definitely not the easiest sinner to solo with, but not particularly too difficult either. The biggest roadblock I'd faced was K-Corp for the third boss, which does way too much damage and is super RNG dependent to beat. Maybe if I threw myself at that brick wall long enough, I could have beaten it, but ultimately it was for the best since the quality of that recording was abysmal. All in all though, not that bad. Regret Faust was the MVP though, simply because she made the bowl manageable. The Liu Ishmael is a DPS monster when attacking high burn targets. Once we get more competent burn IDs, she's gonna hit very hard. I'd love to make more content on this game, but outside of talking about egos and IDs or soloing Mirror Dungeon, there just isn't a whole lot to do. Like, add a PvP mechanic or give some sort of use out of friends. Like, why is this even an online game? I don't know. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, consider liking and subscribing. I plan to try and make at least 1 new video a week, so if you're interested to see more, feel free to stick around. Thanks again, and goodbye.
깔끔하게 해결했네요. 가는 길에 우육면 드실래요?